Well, thank you, Kelly, and good afternoon, everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to be speaking with you here today in the nation's capital. It's still summer here. It's no longer summer in Vancouver, unfortunately. So it's nice to get some blue sky and some still warm weather. So I'm going to run you through I've got a series of slides, but I guess I'll start off that I've been at TransLink now for 2.5 years, coming from the United States, and a lot has happened very, very quickly in our environment in Vancouver. Coming off some down years, we're very much on the upswing and very much driving for success. And here we are in the nation's capital. We had the minister here first thing this morning, of course, Kelly. I have to be able to say a lot of the success that we've had across the spectrum, and you'll see some of that in my material, in my remarks here this afternoon, is because of this federal government, because of this federal government's new commitment to public transportation, the $30 billion over 12 years that Mr. Champagne pointed out, recatalyzed the discussion in our region and made our ready-to-go program ready to go and start spending the money and really start making things very much happen fast. And coming from the United States, where the federal government over decades now, federal transportation funding, FTA funding and so forth, has been a solid partner for transit growth and expansion and innovation. We need to see that happen here in Canada, and I think that 10-year commitment, the 12-year commitment that the federal government now has to PTIF, Green Infrastructure Fund, and so forth, I hope there's another 12 years and another 12 years after that, so that we can all plan with some certainty that there will be that senior government support. The other thing I wrote down from the minister's speech, because it resonated so well with what we're doing in Vancouver, is think big, think innovative, and think green. We're doing all three of those things, and I think you'll see that in my remarks going forward. So just very quickly, who we are. Many of you, if not most of you in the room, are familiar with Vancouver, have been out to Vancouver, whether on business or leisure. TransLink is got an 1,800 kilometer square kilometer service district, a very large, very complicated service district, all the way from urban to, in fact, rural parts of our region, as depicted in the image. We have a BC, very strong economy. Vancouver region, very, very strong economy, something like a 3% GDP growth over the past year, and a low unemployment rate. Growing fast. We're expecting to increase population by some 50% over the next 30 years, and we continue to grow by leaps and bounds, which are causing a lot of pressures in our region. One of our cities, the city of Surrey, probably the fastest large cities in the region, growing by something like 1,000 residents a month. And Surrey over the next decade will in fact be the largest city in the Vancouver metropolitan region. And because of that strong economy, because it's an attractive place to live, housing affordability has become the #1 public policy issue, the #1 political and social issue of our time in our region. Our region is also very much constricted in its ability to grow by its urban growth boundaries and by geography. You can see from this image, we're bounded by water to the west, south, and even the north. We're bounded by mountains, and then the green space, the agricultural land reserve, and our own growth management restrictions make growth very concentrated. It has to be concentrated, and with that comes a series of challenges. And then finally, Vancouver is Canada's largest port. So as a gateway city, a gateway region, freight and goods movement is incredibly important, as are the mainline freight rails. We heard the speaker earlier talking about the freight railroads as well. So I give you those facts because all of that very much drives who TransLink is, what TransLink's program is, and in fact, our relevancy in the community. And I think what's really cool about TransLink, and this is whether it's TTC or Metrolinx here in Ottawa, we are relevant. We know, all of us in this room, we know that we are so relevant to the success of our communities in our region, whether it's in the know stakeholders, the political class, the business class, or just, regular public. If they're talking about things like housing affordability, if they're talking about access to jobs, within that same sentence is, where's the transit? How is transit supporting livability and prosperity in our region? So that's a great place to be. As Kelly said, it's an exciting time to be in our business. It's very exciting in a region that wants more of what you have, and just do it faster, please. They love us to death. But it certainly is a great place to be. Very quickly, who TransLink is, many of you probably know, we're a multimodal organization. It was set up in 1999 with really very, very broad responsibilities, both in theory and fact. We provide all the transit service for the 21 municipalities in the region. We're also deemed to be the lead transportation planner for our region. Not necessarily a power that TransLink, over its now almost 2 decades history, has used as effectively as it could, but increasingly I think we're getting to that point. We also have a responsibility for roads and bridges in our region. Again, when the founders, the people who wrote the TransLink legislation 2 decades ago, they wanted to see some sense of integrated planning and delivery of services. So we share responsibilities for what's called the major road network with our municipalities. We provide a certain level of funding. We're also a very, very significant funder for pedestrian and bike facilities in the region. We deliver well over 400 million annual trips in our system, making us one of the largest transit systems by ridership in North America, notwithstanding I think we're the 23rd largest major metropolitan region in the United States and Canada. So we very much hit well above our weight in terms of the utilization of the system. So with that, on to really the focus of what I want to talk about here this afternoon. As Kelly pointed out, I've been in the business for a long time. I started my transit career at New York City Transit, and before then I was in various other transportation-related jobs or responsibilities in the city of New York. And over time during my career, I've really come to focus on increasing ridership and market share as kind of the North Star for what we should be doing. You heard the speaker from TTC saying, well, we shouldn't just focus on ridership. It's not just sort of widgets. I agree with that, but at the same time, as a manager of a public transit system, whether I was on the planning side or now as whether at King County or here at TransLink leading the agency, I would contend if we are focused on, as an agency, ridership growth, and more importantly, an increasing share of trips in our region taken by something other than a single occupant vehicle, we are then focused on the North Star. We should be focused on all of the right things, from customer service to state of good repair to being innovative, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll go through that as you see in this wheel. That's the theme, that's who I am, that's what I'm about, and I'm very proud to say in all the places I've been, we've seen those ridership gains. And if you're seeing those ridership gains, I would contend you're doing the right things for your region. After all, particularly in major metropolitan regions, we do have a public policy purpose, and that is to make our region and our communities more livable. So I'm going to take you through this sort of cycle. This is not meant to be exhaustive and all the things that we should be thinking about, but I think they're timely in terms of where we are at TransLink in this point in time as it relates to my North Star, increasing market share and ridership. So first off, we were delighted to host the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago tomorrow. We got to ride with them on the train for about 35 minutes and then out in Surrey to announce the approval of the business cases for our major transit expansion plan. So you can't do this, obviously, without extensive partnerships. So we have what's called the Mayor's Plan. It was the plan that went to plebiscite and lost in 2015, recatalyzed in the spring of 2016 with the announcement of the PTIF program. Everything's been on the upswing as well. These are the various different elements of the service improvements that are promised from our program. It's a 10-year plan. We now have $9 billion secured. The first phase was approved by our policy board in the late fall of 2016. The second phase was approved with all the regional funding and the deals with the federal and provincial government on June 28th, and then all came to a head with the announcement with the Prime Minister and Premier Horgan just about a month and a half ago, just 2 weeks ago. So what it promises is a dramatic increase in bus service. One of the things that I focused on when I got here, when I got to TransLink, is we were looking at the big investment program. Let's make sure while we were talking about the major capital that takes years and years, we all know that, it takes a long time to deliver our major rail projects, let's make sure that we're getting new service out ASAP, really fast. That is what our customers want. That's what they expect. So part of the hallmark of the program, the first phase of the plan was adopted in November of 2016. We were out putting additional service in the system 6 weeks later in January. In fact, before any of the new revenue streams that were adopted by our policy board were put in place. So fast forward to that, a lot of bus service increases just in the last year and a half, with a 25% increase promised. Big increase in SkyTrain service. That's what we need to do is acquire a lot of new vehicles for the SkyTrain network. Many of those are on order and now full funded through the $9 billion program. A significant growth in our fleet. In fact, we're going to go out to procurement for the SkyTrain network for over 200 cars. It'll be the largest procurement of its kind in our history. The big sexy projects are our two major projects over on the lower right. The 5.7 kilometer extension of our Millennium Line, the so-called Broadway subway, part of the automated SkyTrain network, $2.8 billion program, and then eventually 27 kilometers of surface light rail in the city of Surrey, and then linking up to the city of Langley. Two-part project, not unlike what's going on here in Ottawa. First 10.5 kilometers now fully funded. In fact, we've just started procurement for that, and hopefully over the next 3 years or so, we will go to get full funding for the additional 16 kilometers of rail. So with this program in place now, and that infusion of service dollars in place now, we talked about that Wendy's presentation. You add service, you do it smart, strategically, riders will respond to that, and we are very much seeing that happen. You know, one of the things that I think is remarkable about TransLink, and in fact was one of the things that attracted me from Seattle to move up to Vancouver, was the relationship between transportation, transit planning, and land use planning. And Vancouver, at least from our lens in Seattle, got it right. It's something that we admired and were jealous of, because we couldn't quite figure out how to do that in Seattle and much in the United States. We've had a hard time in making it happen. And over the last number of years in particular, there's been TOD on steroids. So if you've been out on the SkyTrain network in Vancouver and you see all of this development, towers integrated with our transit stations, it's really, really phenomenal. This is an image of our Marine Gateway station. It came online in 2012, and it kind of spurred the renaissance, really, in transit-oriented development, high-density development around the region. These buildings sold out, I think, in 4 hours when they were put on sale, before they were even completed. And that was the signal to developers that investing money, developing high-density housing around the transit nodes would, in fact, pay off. This image just gives a sense of the number of active to-permit or planned projects that are immediately adjacent to SkyTrain stations. It doesn't even count developments that are a couple blocks away from the network that we don't have any direct involvement in. In point of fact, we're tracking something like 194 projects right now, with a market value of something like $48 billion around the SkyTrain network. It's absolutely fueling ridership growth. It's fueling a lot of significant demands on our system. But it can surely show the way. In our very compact region, where we can't grow out, we've got to grow up. And basically every city in our region is seeing the need to find ways to invest and partner with developers for density around transit systems. I draw your attention to the right quadrant of the map. That's the Evergreen Extension into the cities of Port Moody and Coquitlam. Evergreen line opened up in December of 2016, and you can already see the kind of development around the Evergreen line. It's absolutely astonishing. Now, this TOD, what we see from the developers, the developments proximate to, adjacent to our SkyTrain stations generally capture about a 10 to 20% increase in value of those condos. So there's money to be made by the developers. We do need to be thinking about finance tools. How do we think about going forward with transit expansion? All of us in the room are thinking about that all the time. It's great to get the federal money. Federal is paying for 30 to 35 to 40% of our program. The province is paying for 40% of our capital program, but we have to raise new taxes and fees to make up the rest on the capital, and we have to raise the taxes and fees for all of the operating. So that $9 billion plan I mentioned, much of it's capital, but a lot of that is operating dollars as well, and as we all know, finding the operating dollars to run those additional buses, to run those additional trains is always tricky. So somewhat conventionally, the current plan on the regional funding side is a mixture of property tax increase, which is one of our funding sources, gas tax increase, one of our funding sources, albeit it's going to be expanded by the province in the spring. Fare increases. We already recover about 55% of our operating costs from fares. We're going to be bumping up fares a little bit to pay for the expansion as well. We've also started to move into something called the development cost charge, and that's new for TransLink, not new in our region. The Metro Vancouver, which is the utility, major utility, water utility, and solid waste utility in our region, has been using development cost charges. What that means is for any new development in the region, and it's a uniform fee throughout the region, so it's not flexible depending on the region. New residential could be anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 per new unit. For commercial office, $1 per square foot. This is going to raise about $30 million a year in revenue. It can only be used for capital, so it will be used for debt service. So we're putting our toe in the water, if you will, for using development and gaining some of that capturing some of the value uplift. However, what I don't put in place, just as an aside, some of our lunch table talk, this is our P3 line, by the way, Canada line. So making this project work within the construct of our 30-year, sometimes not very flexible agreement will not be an easy task either. So it's part of, I think, what is, as an industry, we need to be thinking about from the P3 perspective as well. I'd also point out on the Evergreen line that I mentioned before, one of the stations there was not originally funded by the province or the federal government. City of Coquitlam, working with their developers, also kicked in most of the money for that station that otherwise wouldn't be built, and now they are beginning to permit lots of new development around that station area. Now, sustainable growth, very, very important. It's very important to our community. We want to have livable communities. We want to be paying attention to climate and so forth. So part of that is what we should be doing as an organization. Minister said, think big, think green. Well, we are thinking green as well. Many of you in this room are thinking green. We were one of the first agencies in North America to join the APTA sustainability commitment at the platinum level. We're very, very proud of that, and we continue to double down particularly on environmental sustainability. Pictured here, you all know what that is, an electric bus. We're partnering with Cutric. Next year we'll be demoing 4 of these buses with 2 different charging stations, 2 buses from New Flyer, 2 from Nova. When I was at King County Metro, we started our electric bus program using Proterra fleet. Here at TransLink, about half of our buses now are alternative fuel between our electric trolley buses, hybrid diesel buses, and CNG. We're looking at probably early next decade is our inflection point. The studies that we have done, marrying it up to our fleet replacement cycle, would suggest that by the 2022-2025 period, we reach a really good break-even point where moving into electric battery buses, zero emission, makes sense from the bottom line standpoint. not only from the GHG reductions, but really the life cycle cost. At the end of the day, I want to be able to say to our taxpayers, we're not just investing in these technologies to make us feel better. We're investing in this ultimately because it makes sense, even from the taxpayer perspective. That's how you continue to build support, in my view, from the general public going forward. One of the challenges, though, with early adoption of this technology, and that's where, go green, as the minister pointed out, I think is very important, and just to reemphasize. If we were to at the mid-next decade, to commit to 100% zero-emission fleet, we estimate somewhere between $250 and $780 million in upfront capital investment. And that's primarily for the charging stations. Those charging stations are not cheap. These are just, we're doing 2 of them for the pilot. We have to figure out, are we doing en-route charging, or are we doing base and depot charging? In all cases, it's expensive infrastructure. So, I would urge federal government, provincial governments, particularly in how they're going to be allocating their green infrastructure funds, and we've had these discussions with our province, to put some money into that upfront capital investment. That would be very, very hard for an agency like TransLink to front those dollars. Those dollars would come at the expense of other things that we should be doing, whether it's service or just basic state of good repair. So if we want to adapt quickly and move towards the national and our provincial greenhouse gas reduction targets, we're going to need help with that upfront capital going forward. So that's a discussion we all need to continue to have. It's one thing to do pilots and to come up with the money for the pilots. I think our pilot's something like $8 or $9 million. It's another thing to go all in. We are going to our mayors actually on Friday this week, and then our board in a couple of weeks with a motion to adopt 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 and be 100% renewable in all of our fuel sources as well by 2050. Audacious goals, but it's something for us to be pushing towards. And I think that's very important in terms of how the public perceives us. British Columbia, Vancouver region, people live there in part because they really, really affiliate well with the environment. We are outdoors type of people. This is all part of our brand going forward. Part of sustainable growth, however, is what does that future hold in store for the capacity of our always constrained transportation network. As I said, by 2040 or so, we're expecting something like a 50% increase in population. We are not building more roads. We are not building more roads in the Metro Vancouver region, and we cannot build transit anywhere close to fast enough or as robust enough to meet that kind of capacity challenge on our roadways. So over the last year, our mayors, our region's mayors, commissioned a mobility pricing study. We put in place a commission. You're going to hear from Dan Firth. Dan, raise your hand. A little bit this afternoon. He's going to get into some detail on the Mobility Pricing Commission work. Suffice it to say that our political leadership very much understands that down the road we've got to do something different. Number one, our gas tax is going to continue to decline as a major source of our revenue. In fact, right now, it's the third largest revenue source we have after fares and property tax. Very, very significant. But as we're thinking about zero emission of electric vehicles and automated vehicles, that share of the federal tax is going to continue to decline. We've got to make up that revenue source. And how do you manage the capacity of the roadway network? That was the study. I'm not going to steal Dan's thunder, but the study suggested you could reduce congestion by something like 20%, increase reliability of your travel by 25%, and you can raise considerable dollars. We need to have that public discussion. Now, when that report was issued in late May of this year, guess what happened to it? It was all go, let's talk about that later. We have municipal elections on October 20th in our region, and no one wanted to make this a political issue because you can bet it would have been a political issue going forward. The key there is we don't have mobility pricing anywhere in North America, and there's a region. It's not politically easy to do. We're going to have to lean in over the next number of years, and we've done a lot of good work to pave the way. Now, part of enacting mobility pricing is adopting innovative technology. That's clear. No matter the type of technology and the methodology we'd use, for mobility pricing. Technology is a big piece of that. That's a big piece of our overall environment as transit providers. How do we keep up with technological change, and in particular, how are we continuing to think about technology in the service of the customer experience? And that's something that we're laggards in some places at TransLink. We're ahead in others. And I think everyone in the room can probably say, here's where we're leading, here's where we're lagging. We as an industry need to continue to get on board and move as quickly as we are able to adapt and adopt to new technologies, particularly for our customers. You know, young people, they're all tethered to their mobile device. That's where they get information from. That's where they get their knowledge from. Clearly, that's where they're going to have to interact increasingly with our transit systems. This summer, we launched our Tap to Go, where you can use just a credit card and just tap directly on our Compass smart card system. You can use your mobile phone if it's enabled with NFC technology. You have a Google Wallet, an Apple wallet, and you can tap. In fact, some of the stats are showing that a larger proportion of people are using their phones to tap in the system than are using their phones in other retail environments. So we're actually kind of getting ahead of that. Right now, about 7,000 unique cards are being tapped each and every day, and that continues to grow. It's a niche in our market. We still want our customers, our regular customers, to use their Compass card for now, but for the infrequent user, someone who's going to a sports event, a cultural event downtown, visitors on the cruise ships or from YVR coming into the city, you don't need to figure out how to use our ticket vending machines, which are always a challenge for any newcomer. You can just tap and go. Part of our mayor's plan, our investment plan, we've seeded a number of several $1 million for various different innovative alternative types of services. Probably the most, I think the most interesting, and I think that can bear a lot of fruit coming forward, is what we call an open innovation call. About 2 months ago, we put out an open request for interest to industry, academics, and other governmental agencies focused on mobility as a service. Give us your proposals for what types of MOS type of projects we could bring forward. We got something like 90 proposals. Really, really cool. And you know, I've scanned all 90 of them. There's not a bad one in the 90. Now, they don't all necessarily fit into the MAS concept that we have at this point, but we can learn from that. We can sort of take from some of those proposals and say, well, we really like that one. Let's go off in a room and figure out how to evolve remote access to elevators for people with disabilities, for example. That was one of the proposals. Didn't fit into MAS, but it certainly fits into our services for people with disabilities. There was a question asked before about that. People that don't have use of their arms as easily to push the button for the elevator, there might be ways to gain remote access. So anyway, open innovation calls, really, really important, and I would urge you to be thinking about how you as transit agencies as well can get in that game. Try to figure out, whether it's homegrown in your own region or working with larger companies, how to bring in that innovative thinking. So at the end of the day, we can all transact our planning and booking and activation of our trip in one place. That's kind of the goal that we all have in our region. That's coming at some point in time, fully connected transit system. Now, all of this goes to, in a lot of ways, something that's very important to me. It's one of the things, in fact, when the board hired me, that they wanted me to focus on, is brand management going forward. Now, why is brand management important? When you come right down to it, if you have a lousy brand, then that means the general public in your region don't like you. And that also means they largely won't support or trust you, particularly trust you with new tax dollars, which means if we're trying to grow and improve the sustainability, the livability, and the prosperity of our region to really be relevant in our space, you got to have a good brand. Otherwise, something like you go to vote in 2015 in metropolitan Vancouver and you get your head handed to you by a 2-to-1 vote against transit expansion, when in fact everyone wanted more transit, they just didn't trust TransLink to do it. Well, we've turned that around, and brand management is so very important. Again, I'm probably speaking to the choir of all my colleagues from the transit industry, but it's really, really very important. Try to be thinking about that all the time in everything you do, whether it's your intergovernmental affairs, your marketing programs, how you do your public engagement, how you're just generally engaging with the general public. And I'd like to point out, even by third-party validation that we had nothing to do with, we're seeing our brand increase by stats. This particular slide is from BC Business Magazine. Annually, they survey most beloved brands in the region. When I first saw that survey, when I got to TransLink, we were way, way down. In this year's report that came out a couple of months ago, we jumped up 16 spots, and in fact, our jump was by far larger than any other brand that was studied. So it was good third-party validation, really, that we're making a difference going forward. And we're doing fun things like Seth Rogen. I'm sure many of you heard about our Seth Rogen thing in Vancouver. A whole lot of fun. It started with Morgan Freeman. That was fun for 48 hours. The voice of God on our system. It's like, whoa, this is cool. And we launched that with our Tap to Pay. And then CNN comes out with a story. We see it at 8 in the morning, Vancouver time. Oh my God, he's got an at Me Too movement. So we say, no more voice of God in our system. An hour later, Seth text says, I'm in. And then over the next number of weeks, we worked with him directly, and he's now the voice of our system. And one of the things we've done from our own internal tracking on brand and brand affiliation, people are responding to that. They see that we're being innovative, we're being fun in our system, and we're bringing in other people like a movie star and a comedian like Seth Rogen to do some fun stuff on the system. So, you know, maybe he's becoming overexposed. Right? Toronto, are you in the room? Yeah, you copied us. Never mind. But you know, we've heard from SEPTA in Philadelphia. They want to get a celebrity to be the voice of their system as well. Double-deckers. Now, how long have you been operating double-deckers here in Ottawa? A long time, right? Well, we're introducing double-deckers. I say, we're innovating. We've got double-deckers. Of course, you know, Victoria on Vancouver Island, they've had double-deckers as well for a long time. But it speaks volumes to the public to say, we're listening. We're trying to give you a better ride. We care about what we're doing, and we're going to wrap up our buses to look pretty cool. So what does this all turn into? Back to my circle is ridership. If we're focused on all the right things, if we're focused on expanding service, focused on public engagement, focused on innovative ways to finance our system so we can move faster and bigger in our system, focused on how people see us as a brand going forward. At the end of the day, people will respond. Riders will respond. And I'm pleased to say we're on a 3-year growth trend. So Wendy's report on ridership, we're right there. In 2017, we led all of the United States and Canada by a long shot. This is APTA statistics from the National Transit Database. 5.7% growth in boardings. Only Montreal in Canada was in the plus side. One of the other things I want to mention, because this was in the Q&A during Wendy's, if you look at Seattle's number, Seattle led the United States in ridership at the same time. No surprise, I'm from Seattle, but that's besides the point. Seattle has had Uber and Lyft for years. Uber and Lyft, I think, they were permitted in, I think, around 2012. So even as TNCs have come into the Seattle market, Seattle ridership continues to boom. Now, what's the dynamic there? What's going on? Well, Seattle's been growing. They've been growing their light rail system. They've now begun to grow, once again, the bus system. So every metro region is going to be different. The question about New York City is its own issue with Uber, with taxis, with congestion on the streets, and a falling apart subway system. Los Angeles is a different environment, that it's a huge, sprawling city with, in the context of that huge city and not very good yet, transit systems. So you bring in something like TNCs, they're filling in the gaps. I would argue where you have a region like Seattle, and I think Vancouver, which does not yet have TNCs, probably next year based on what we expect to be provincial legislation over the next few weeks. I don't fear it. I think we need to embrace it, and I think the study that CUDA has done that suggests, at least in the large urban areas, actually has been a little uptick in transit ridership, would suggest we can easily coexist. We need to figure out how to work with them smartly, but we can in fact coexist. And at the end of the day, as a transit agency, public agency, we can't put our heads in the sand. We have to figure out how to coexist. So far this year through July, ridership is up 6.8%. So things are booming for us. We have a lot of advantages. We have a lot of good things going. I'd like to think that some of the things that we're doing in Vancouver are things that you can replicate in your region as well. But when you add all the things together on that circle, which is what I'm trying to depict, you can then comprehensively and integrated, you can find ways to grow your ridership. And by the way, if you're growing your ridership, or we're growing our ridership by this amount, that far exceeds job growth and population growth in our region, which means we are increasing the share of trips being taken by transit in our region, and therefore we are relevant to the outcomes in our community. So with that, I want to thank you, and if there's time for a few Q&A, I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you. Probably just a couple of questions. Thank you.